to Assembly Update. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Mike Norris. Mike Norris represents the 144th Assembly District. That includes the counties of Erie, Niagara, and Orleans. And we want to thank you folks all across Western New York for tuning in. Our opportunity to let you folks know what's going on here at the New York State Capitol in Albany. And Mike Norris, thanks for joining us.
Mike, thanks for having me on the show. I always enjoy being on.
And right, we got a lot to talk about. We're knee deep in budget talk. In fact, from when we're taping this program, we're just a couple days away from when the budget's supposed to be passed. We'll be talking about the process, where things are right now, some of the big ticket items that are being discussed and still up in the air. Maybe by the time you folks see this program, it will already have all been decided, but that time will tell on that. We got lots to talk about on that front. But let's start first with what might be the overriding issue here at the state capitol, and who knows, maybe it will become part of the budget negotiations in the final few minutes. The surge in crime that we're seeing around the state, whether it's urban New York down in New York City or around some of the big cities like Buffalo, or even in rural New York State, we're seeing more crime, more violent crime. And a lot of people are saying that it's recent changes that were made in Albany to the bail laws, the laws that allow judges to decide if people that are charged with crime should maybe be waiting behind bars until their trial. There were some changes, more people are being let out on the streets, and some will tell you that's why there's more crime in the state. Is it that simple?
I think it is that simple. I voted against bail reform when it first took place in 2019. I remember listening to now Senator Tony Palumbo, but Assemblyman Palumbo at the time, who was a former prosecutor, debate that bill in the middle of the night. It was done in the middle of the night. And he raised concerns about issuing appearance tickets for some of the most serious and violent crimes out there. Never forget it. And I voted no, and now we see what has been taking place in our communities. And unfortunately, crime is up, and it's because of the repeat offenders who they commit a crime, some sort of a larceny, they go to the judge, they get an appearance ticket to come back, they go out and do it again, and they do it again, and they do it again. And this needs to be repaired. It's very simple. I've called for a full repeal of this, and what I think will happen, and because the governor has put forth a 10-point plan of her own, even the governor recognizes that there needs to be changes with this so-called bail reform.
She seems to be hearing what we're hearing, right? And what we're reading in the newspapers across the state.
From prosecutors, from sheriffs, from police officers, we're hearing the devastating effects. We see it in the numbers as well. And she's seeing the same thing. And what needs to be done is paramount: restore judicial discretion. Our judges, many of them are elected. They serve a term. They're at the will of the people. They take their jobs very seriously. I know many, many judges. They do that. And they also recognize within the community who may be a dangerous threat. They understand who may come back. So the point on this also is, we're the only state in the nation that does not allow dangerousness of the individual to be a factor when setting bail. Basically, the bail is in New York, is just to make sure that they come back to court. Now that should be changed. That should be an element to deciding whether or not someone should be held on bail.
That's what judges get paid the big money for, right? To use the vernacular. That's what judges are there to do.
That's right, and they could use whatever. You can come up with a balancing test, a factor test to weigh whether or not the person should be let out or not. But this all comes down to the safety of our citizens. And if someone is a threat to our society, then we need to make sure they are held on bail, and then they can certainly have their trial and go through the criminal justice system. But I'm not a big fan, as you know, of having policy in our state budget. I think we should be dealing with it based upon the numbers and looking at it and seeing whether or not we can afford this massive budget that's going forth. But if that's the only way that we can get some changes, much needed changes to bail reform, then it must be done. And I'm encouraging the legislative leaders to take a strong look at this, because our safety of our citizens are at stake.
All right, well, before we get to the budget talk ourselves, then one last question on this. bail reform issue, and that is the scenario that you laid out where somebody gets arrested on a violent crime or a serious crime, goes before the judge, he's got no, or she has no possibility of what to do other than to let them go, and then they repeat the crime and they come back, and it's just a revolving door thing. Becoming quite common. As you said, the governor seems to have heard about it, heard the concerns of the people, and is willing to do something about it. But we're not hearing that yet from the legislative leaders, from Speaker Hasty in the Assembly, from Senator Stuart Cousins in the Senate. They don't seem to be so interested in changing it back to the way it was or making any kind of changes to the system.
No, the Speaker and the Senate, President of the Senate, Andrew Stuart Cousins, wants to just keep the status quo. But we can't. There has to be changes. And there should also be some changes to the discovery laws as well. I certainly believe that the defense should be given the material from the prosecution, but what's happening right now is that time frames are so short in making sure that discovery is being given to the defense that a lot of these charges have been dismissed outright. And it's been a tremendous burden on our district attorneys and their staff, and so that's something else has to be looked at as well. It's a very complicated issue, but the most important thing, paramount, is the safety of our citizens. And right now, there are being crimes committed by individuals who've been given appearance tickets for serious crimes who keep repeating itself over and over and over again. We have to repeal bail reform, and we have to restore judicial discretion, because I have confidence in our judges that they will do the right thing when weighing all these factors.
So you might not like having those kind of policy issues included in the budget negotiations, but if you've got a governor who feels one way, legislative leaders who feel the other way, and they're negotiating a budget, that might be where the horse trading is done, and maybe if something's got to get done, maybe it'll be as part of the budget process, right?
Yes, and in New York State, the governor has tremendous power in terms of the budget and what goes in the budget, how the budget is, dollars are being spent. Probably the most powerful governor in terms of budgetary issues. That's one way that she can use her hammer to drive this thing, and we need to make sure that there are some significant changes to our bail reform contained within this budget. And if not, I will be very disappointed, and I will continue, even after that, to be very loud about this, because I hear about it from my constituents. I was just with Sheriff Mike Felicetti, our Nye County Sheriff, just recently, just yesterday, at the Heartland Fire Company. Went out for the maple syrup weekend breakfast. It was great out there, but we talked right there at the table about these impacts of bail reform. It has to be changed.
Was breakfast good?
It's great.
Did you bring me any?
No, I did not, but I will next time, Mike.
So we got that going on here, and let's turn now to the budget talk. And I suppose the first thing I want to ask you, Mike Norris, as you're hearing and keeping your ears to the ground as to what's being discussed, how about any change on the gas tax to provide some relief at the pumps for the people that you represent in the 144th District in Western New York? People like me, you didn't bring me breakfast. Do I get any relief at the gas pumps?
Well, we need to. I called upon that. The Republican conference has had a whole inflation package for some time to reduce the gas tax, for example, also on sales tax for diapers and things like that, to make sure that we foresaw what was coming. But back to the gas tax. The difference between the people in upstate New York and the people in New York City and Long Island is that we use our cars to get to work. And that is a big difference. So when you're talking to the folks in New York City, my colleagues, I have to explain to them, to remind them that the way we get to work, the way we get to school, the way we move around, how our agricultural community operates on our farms. We use gas and diesel, and we need this relief right now. Obviously, with the crisis in Ukraine, the price of oil continues to go up, and we need to repeal that gas tax. I believe it's very, very important. It should be part of this budget. And it's, when you look at it, it's up to 50 cents in New York State per gallon for different taxes on the gas. And that should be repealed immediately. We should have a gas tax holiday through at least the end of the year and provide that relief, because it does add up to the people of Western New York particularly.
There would be one happy New Yorker sitting right here who would love to see that, right? I mean, who wouldn't love to see that? I mean, it's been crazy what the totals when you go to pump gas into your car.
Yeah, and the interesting part is too is some of the gas tax will go to dedicated funds for our roads and for our culverts and things like that. And the good news is this: we have one-time shots coming out of Washington D.C. right now, so we could use those funds from Washington, D.C., which are one-time shots. They're not going to keep coming back and over. This would be a good way to invest by putting additional money into roads, repealing that gas tax, and filling those funds, those trust funds, with some of these federal funds. I think that is a common sense approach to what's needed for the people of particularly upstate New York, and that's something I'm supporting strongly.
What are some of the other things you're keeping a close eye on as the budget starts to come home?
The most important thing, I think, just the overall arch of the budget. And you remember I worked for Assemblyman Dave Seaman back in 1995. The budget back then was only $55 billion, and that was about 25 years ago. Now the budget is 212. That's last year's budget. The governor proposed 216. The Senate majority, I believe, was at 226. The Assembly was over 220 themselves. We cannot sustain the spending. We can't afford to live here. So how I look at this budget is I intend to vote against the entire budget because we just can't afford it. That population loss is great. People continue to leave to go to Texas and to Florida and other states. And by the way, if you combine Texas and Florida's budget, it doesn't even equal New York State. So overall, I think the message is we need to stand up and say enough is enough. But as in any budget, when you look at your household budget, your business budget, you have to make investments. From early on, our federal government invested in our military right off the bat. They invested in our infrastructure. And New York should be, obviously doing the same thing with infrastructure and education. So I'm looking at making sure that our CHIPS funding is increased. For what CHIPS is for our roads. It goes back to our local municipalities, and they can fix our roads, our bridges, and our culverts. Very, very important. Our libraries, for example, the construction aid for our libraries was reduced by $20 million by the governor in her proposed budget. That's something that has to be restored. Help for our veterans to make sure that we continue to support them, particularly when they come back from combat, and support additional funding to the Joseph Dwyer program, which is a peer-to-peer counseling program and has had significant impact on our veterans. And also our volunteer fire service. Assemblyman Billy Jones from the North Country, part of my class from 2017, supports a bill which would have parity for our volunteer fire service so they can charge insurance companies when they go on an ambulance run. And especially after COVID, our volunteer fire companies are suffering because they were not able to do fundraising at the same clip as they were in the past. And this would help their budgets, and it would also provide parity. So it's something, again, I'm not a big person who wants to have a policy in the budget, but if it's an avenue to do that, this is something very important in our volunteer fire service. So it's something else I'm looking at.
And it's amazing to me, and we're out of time, but it's amazing to me to think that the budget's getting so much bigger year after year after year, and yet we end up having these debates about things like libraries being cut, right?
Yeah, these are priorities, these are investments, and though I will intend to vote against the entire budget, those are things I've been working on as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, the Transportation Committee, to make sure that those priorities for the people of West New York are in that budget, and that we get our fair share when you compare to New York City and all the public transit system monies that they're getting, and so on and so forth. So I will continue to fight for them because those are investments. It's good for the people of Western New York.
As we sit here and tape the program, we don't know how this budget plays out and where the monies are all going to fall. Next program, we'll know for sure. Mike Norris, thanks for joining us today. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
If you folks watching want to know how to reach out to your representative, it's an easy thing for you to do. You can contact your representative, Mike Norris, at his office in Clarence. You can do it two main ways. Dial 716-839-4691 or send an email, like you see on the bottom of the screen, to norrism@nyassembly.gov. As we thank Mike Norris, we thank you folks too. Hope to see you for our next Assembly Update.